So today's lesson is on what we call a logic model. A logic model is what funders look for when they think about funding a program. So what is a logic model? Well, a logic model is a depiction of a program showing what the program will do and what the program will accomplish. It consists of a series of if-then types of relationship. We'll talk more about that. A logic model is used for program planning as well as program evaluation. There are three simple components or elements, basic elements to a logic model: is inputs, outputs, and outcomes. Input essentially is what's coming in, what you need in order to bring about the outcome. Outputs is essentially what you plan to do with the inputs, and outcomes is basically the result of what you're trying to bring about. Let's look at some examples of everyday use of logic models before we move into using it for the purpose of programs. We start off with the situation. In other words, the problem that we're having. In this case, I have a headache. My head hurts. So how do I get to the point where I'm feeling better? Well, here's the logic model. The first thing we do is to look at what do we need in order to stop the pain. In this case, the inputs will be to get some pills. The next thing is, what do we need to do with the pill? That's called the output. How are we going to use the pill? Well, we're going to take the pill. And then when we take the pill, we're going to feel better, which is known as the outcomes. Again, inputs, outputs, outcomes situation. We're going to get really more into this as we move through the presentation. Another example of a person who's hungry. And that's the situation, that's the problem. So what do? Well, we get food. Remember, and getting the food, this is what we call the input. We eat the food, this is what we're going to do with the input. And then we're going to feel better, which is the outcome. Here's an example of a family vacation. What are the inputs? Well, first we need the family members, the budget, a car, and camping equipment. This being the case, the outputs, so what we're going to use inputs for is to drive to the state park, set up the camp, and while there, we're going to play, talk, etc. As a result of this, which is going to be the outcome or the result, is that family members will learn about each other, to be a family bond, and family have good time together. We're going to talk about assumptions later on in the presentation and the different parts of assumptions. Let's look at an example of a logic model. This particular model looks at a program education program, a parent education program. The situation. In this situation, the parents are having a hard time being a parent, and as a result of that, they're feeling really stressed out. Let's go and see how we can use this in theory to resolve that issue of the parent being frustrated and the parent being stressed out. The first thing we're going to do is ask ourselves, what are the inputs that we need to bring to the table? In this case, we need staff, we need money, we need partners, and we need research. The outputs is we want to create programs for the parents. We want to use evidence-based programs for 8 sessions, and we want to be able to facilitate support groups. The participants that we plan to focus on is parents between the ages of, who have kids between the ages of 3 and 10. The outcome is going to be your short term, your midterm, and your long-term outcome. Here we go again. Your short-term, your midterm, and your long-term outcomes. Your short-term outcome, just to give one example, is that you plan to make sure that parents increase that knowledge of child development. One of the outcomes, midterm outcome is that parents will be able to identify appropriate action to take. And then one of the long-term outcomes is that that person's stress will be reduced and they will have improved relationship with their kids or child. Here's another example of a logic model. You see the input, the output, the age of the participants, the short-term outcome, the long-term outcomes, and finally, the short-term, midterm, and finally, long-term outcome. If-then relationship, we will talk about this a little bit later on. So let's look at an example of a chain of connection when we're looking at a larger model. We talked about input. Another way of putting input is what we call program investment, or what do we need to invest in order to bring about the solution to the problem that we're trying to solve. When we look at outputs, the subtitles on the output is the activities, that is, what do we plan to do? And then the participation, that is, who will we reach? What's that target group? And outcomes, again, we're talking about short-term, midterm, and long-term outcome. That is, what will be the results of what we're trying to do? When we are trying to show a logic model, we're focused on what's known as if-then relationship. That is, if this happened, then this happened. If this happened, then this happened. In this case, they use a tutoring program. They're saying, for example, the if is, if we invest time and money, then we can provide tutoring for 3 hours a week for one school for 50 children. Then students struggling academically will be tutored. If then they will learn and improve their skills, then they will get a better grade, and then they will move to the next grade level. Again, logic model is about if-then. If this happened, then this happened. If this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Again, this is an example of, we talked earlier about a simple form of logic model. Your inputs, your outputs, and your outcome. Here's a bit more detail. Again, we still have our output, our inputs, our outputs, our outcome, but then we have what's known as so what type of scenario. That is, what is the value that we bring to the table? Here's an example of a fully detailed logic model. We see the situation. The next step they list the priorities. The next step is the inputs. And then they talk about the outputs, and talking about the outputs, they talk about the activities they plan to do, the participants who they plan to focus on. Then they move to the outcome or outcome impact. They combine together, which talks about the short term, midterm, and long term. Then they talk about the assumption that they're making and the external factors that can prohibit it from being taken into effect. So when we talk about situation, and that's the first thing we talk about, the first block, that is what programmatic condition exists that demands a programmatic response. This is when we talk about why does it exist, for whom does it exist, who has a stake in the problem, and what can be changed. Inputs. Input can be a number of things in terms of investment. Input might be staff, volunteer, time, money, research, base, materials, equipment, technologies, and partners. Output can be what we do and who we reach. Output can be activities such as train, teach, deliver services, develop products and resources, network with others, build partnerships, assess, facilitate, or work with the media. Participation can be participants, clients, customers, agencies, decision makers, policy makers, etc. Outcomes can be, in terms of short term, it can be awareness, knowledge, attitude, skills, opinion, aspiration, motivations, and behavior intent. All of these can be your short-term outcome. Your long-term outcome can affect changes in a person's behavior, decision-making, policies, and social action. That's your medium. Your long-term effects or conditions can be a change in conditions, that is social well-being related to health, person's economic, civic, or the person's environment in terms of long-term. So what do we mean by goal? By goal, we mean goal equals impact. Impact equals long-term outcome. Your objectives is participants focused, which equals outcomes. Activities equals outputs. Again, your goal equal impact. Your impact equals long-term outcomes. Your objectives equals outcome. And your activities equals output. This talks a little bit more about goal definition. What is the difference between an output and outcome? Well, a number of patients discharged from a state mental hospital is the output. The percent discharged who are capable of living independent is an outcome. Here's another example. In this example, the focus of this is a crime control program. This talks about the output, and this talks about the outcome. The one below that is highway construction, talks about the outputs, and it talks about the outputs, and it talks about the outcome. Here's another example of giving some different variations when it comes to a logic model. You have to have key indicators. that you use in order to measure the specific outcome that you plan to bring about. And you can ask these questions as to how will you know when you see it? What evidence are you going to use? If you can have both quantitative as well as qualitative research indicators. Here's another example of a logic model. When we talk about the different types of activities indicators, it can be anywhere from amount of product or service delivered. It can be type of customers or clients served, time of service. As you see, this list goes down to customer satisfaction. And the examples, which is over in this column here, is, for example, number of clients, number of consultants, number of workshops. Your source of data collection, you can use existing data as well as program participants, and other ways is non-participant staff, collaborators, different source of trying to gather the information. The source of information, where you're getting your information from. Again, that information can be both quantitative and qualitative research. Your data collection, how are you going to collect the data in order to put into your logic model? You can use surveys, interviews, take a test, observation, group techniques, case studies, photography, document reviews, and experts or peer reviews as well. And looking at your data collection, this is going to be very important. When you begin to talk about your data collection. Your data collection, first of all, start with the questions you're going to ask, then the indicators that you're going to use, then the sources that you got your data from, the method that you use, the sample, and the timing of that data. Here's an example of a logic model and reporting. It goes to the situation, the response, the results, and then the evidence.